In this lecture, we'll explore Unity's component system. The big idea here is that we can attach components to game objects in our scene to affect both their state and their behavior. And we've already done this. We've attached a print message script to the main camera, and while we didn't really talk about how that was working, we actually were affecting the behavior of that game object by attaching that script as a component. So let's go to Unity and explore this idea a little more. This is our project from the previous lecture with the main camera selected, and over in the inspector you can see that we have a transform component that we automatically get. We have characteristics about the camera itself and lots of things we can change, like the size, but there's lots of other stuff as well. In our 2D games, by the way, just leave that projection to orthographic. Don't change it to perspective, leave it as orthographic. We also have a GUI layer that we'll get to, not even in this course, but we will eventually get to looking at adding a GUI to our games, and some other things as well. And in the next course, we'll even discover what this audio listener is about. If I select teddy bear, we'll see that the teddy bear also gets a transform component because all our game objects get a transform component by default. That's so that we can set the position, rotation, and scale of our game object in the scene. And that pretty much applies to any entity you'd ever have in the scene, right? You'd have a place in the game world that that object is. You'd have how it's rotated, if at all, and 0, 0, 0 means no rotation. And scale is how big it is relative to its original size. And so 1, 1, 1 means not expanded at all. If in fact I change the teddy bear's X scale to 5, for example, you'd see him get really fat. So I'll change it back to 1. We also get a sprite renderer because we dragged a sprite over to create this game object. The sprite renderer is used to render or draw the sprite. And so that is an important component for game objects that will be drawn. But both the transform and the sprite renderer here, and the transform, camera, GUI layer, flare layer, and audio listener are all components. So by adding and removing components for a particular game object in the scene, we can modify the state of the game object. Back to the teddy bear. Remember when I changed the size to 5? Oh, what the heck? Let's actually make this a tall teddy bear instead. You can see I'm changing the state. I'm changing the characteristics of this particular game object by modifying the transform component. I can also modify the behavior of a particular game object by adding one or more scripts to it, and we will see that soon. But the big idea here is that we have a component system and we modify the state and behavior of our game objects in our scene by modifying those components or by attaching and removing particular components. To recap, in this lecture, we learned how we can use Unity's component system to affect the state and behavior of game objects in our scene by either attaching components to or removing components from those game objects.